Ladies and gentlemen, friends, seekers of growth, let me ask you a powerful question. What's the difference between where you are and where you want to be? The answer isn't set time. It isn't set luck. It sets choice. Yes, change begins with choice. Every day we're faced with hundreds of tiny decisions. What time to wake up, what to feed our body, what thoughts to feed our mind, how we respond to others, and most importantly, what we're going to do with our lives. The amazing truth, we don't need to wait for a new year, a new week, or even a new day to make a change. All it takes is a moment, a decision. Change begins the moment we make a choice. This is not merely motivational jargon, but a psychological and behavioral truth grounded in how human transformation occurs. From a clinical and cognitive perspective, every meaningful change, be it in health, behavior, mindset, or lifestyle, starts not with action, but with a decision. A decision is not just an idea or a wish, it is a cognitive commitment backed by emotional intensity and behavioral intent. Until that point, most people are simply thinking, hoping, or waiting, not changing. Consider the neuroscience of decision-making. The prefrontal cortex, the brain's command center for planning and judgment, activates when we commit to a decision. This activation triggers the release of neurochemicals such as dopamine, which not only reinforce motivation, but actually rewire the brain toward the new direction. In simpler terms, your brain begins to align itself with your new choice the moment you decide. But without that decision, without that mental switch, there is no signal to initiate change. This is why clarity of choice is so essential. The common belief that change takes time can be misleading. While results take time, direction changes in an instant. You cannot arrive at a new destination without first turning the wheel. One of the most empowering realities of life is that we don't need to wait for January 1st, a new job, a crisis, or someone else's permission to begin. Change isn't something that comes to us. It's something we move toward the moment we choose to turn away from what's no longer serving us. Why do most people delay making that choice? Because making a true decision means closing the door on all other options. The word decision comes from the Latin decidere, which means to cut off. A real decision eliminates alternatives. It says this is the direction now, even before we have all the answers. That frightens people, because commitment demands courage. But ironically, it is also the most liberating step one can take. It frees you from the exhausting loop of indecision and gives your life a new focal point. Take the example of someone trying to lose weight or break a destructive habit. They might say, I need to, or I want to, or I should, but nothing happens until the language shifts to I will. That shift is subtle but monumental. It marks the difference between passive intention and active decision, and only one of those rewrites the future. The decision to change also creates what psychologists refer to as cognitive dissonance, a mental discomfort that occurs when our behaviors don't align with our new choice. This dissonance, when used constructively, pushes us to adjust our actions to match our decision. It is a powerful internal force that helps build new habits and dissolve old ones. But it can only occur once a real decision is made. Even spiritually or philosophically, the concept of choice is paramount. Whether in religious doctrines, therapeutic practice, or personal development philosophies, the common thread is this: human beings are endowed with the ability to choose. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, emphasized that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our freedom to choose. And in our choice lies our growth, our healing, and ultimately, our change. So when we say change begins with choice, we're not offering an inspiring slogan. We are pointing to a psychological, neurological, and existential truth. The act of choosing sets everything into motion. You may not control your external circumstances immediately, but you can control the direction of your inner compass. And once that inner alignment occurs, action becomes not only possible, but inevitable. Change, therefore, is not waiting for you at some point in the distant future. It's waiting for you to choose. Choose differently, and everything changes. Taking personal responsibility is the cornerstone of all meaningful and lasting change. from a psychological and behavioral health perspective. It is the point at which an individual moves from passive existence to active ownership of their life. Until that moment, many people are governed by external circumstances, trapped in patterns of blame, denial, or learned helplessness. But when someone takes full responsibility, not just for what they have done, but for how they think, react, and engage with the world, they step into true agency. This is where transformation begins, and it is deeply rooted in both cognitive science and therapeutic practice. Personal responsibility doesn't mean blaming yourself for every negative event or assuming fault for circumstances beyond your control. Instead, it means accepting that your response to those events is within your power. In clinical terms, this is known as the locus of control. Individuals with an internal locus of control believe that their choices, actions, and mindset shape their outcomes. Those with an external locus tend to believe that their fate is in the hands of luck, other people, or uncontrollable circumstances. Research consistently shows that people with an internal locus are more resilient, more successful, and far more adaptive in the face of challenge. When someone begins to take responsibility for their life, their language changes. They no longer say, "I had no choice," or "it's just the way I am," or "they made me feel this way." Instead, they say, "I chose to respond that way," or "I didn't manage that well, but I can do better," or "this is in my hands now." This shift in dialogue is not just semantics, it represents a fundamental neurological change in perception. The brain begins to look for solutions instead of problems, for ownership instead of excuses, and for growth instead of avoidance. In clinical psychology, particularly in cognitive behavioral therapy (CBT), one of the most powerful interventions involves helping a patient identify where they are outsourcing control. When someone believes their emotions, actions, or circumstances are entirely caused by others, they become reactive instead of proactive. Over time, this can lead to chronic stress, anxiety, or depression because the individual feels powerless. But when responsibility is restored, even gradually, there's a measurable increase in hope, motivation, and emotional regulation. They begin to realize, if I created this pattern, I can change it. If I chose that path, I can choose a new one. Taking responsibility also means acknowledging your role in the habits you maintain. It's easy to blame time, finances, or other people for poor health, lack of progress, or broken relationships. But the most honest and difficult question to ask is, what part am I playing in this situation? That kind of radical self-inquiry requires maturity, humility, and courage. But the reward is empowerment. Because when you realize that you are the common denominator in your life, you also realize you are the one with the power to change. This principle extends into leadership, relationships, finances, and personal health. Leaders who take responsibility earn trust. Partners who own their part in conflict strengthen connection. Individuals who stop blaming the economy and start learning how to manage money begin building wealth. It is a universal principle with universal application. Moreover, the practice of responsibility has to be continuous. One moment of clarity doesn't mean the battle is over. Life will always present new opportunities to either blame or take ownership. The key is recognizing that the more responsibility you assume, the more control you gain, not over others, but over yourself. And mastery of self is the first step toward mastering outcomes. Ultimately, taking personal responsibility is not a punishment. It is liberation. It frees you from the dependency on circumstances and places the power back where it belongs, with you. You can't change your past, but you can always take ownership of your present, and in doing so, change your future. Human behavior is often driven by the desire to seek pleasure and avoid pain. This is a fundamental principle in psychology and neuroscience. However, what many fail to recognize is that pain itself is unavoidable. And the real choice we face is not whether we will experience pain, but which kind of pain we are willing to endure. As Jim Rohn insightfully stated, we must all suffer one of two things: the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. This isn't just a motivational phrase, it is a principle that holds clinical and behavioral weight, rooted in the way habits are formed, goals are achieved, and lives are either built or broken. The pain of discipline is the discomfort of doing what needs to be done when you don't feel like it. It involves making sacrifices in the short term for long-term benefit. This could be the soreness after exercise, the mental fatigue of studying when you'd rather relax, or the emotional discomfort of confronting a truth you've long avoided. From a neurobiological standpoint, these acts of discipline engage the brain's executive function, the part responsible for self-control, future planning, and goal-directed behavior. Consistent activation of this system not only strengthens it but also builds resilience and self-mastery over time. On the other hand, the pain of regret is the emotional toll of knowing you didn't do what you could have when you had the chance. It is often more intense and longer lasting than the pain of discipline, because regret is intertwined with feelings of shame, missed opportunity, and self-disappointment. Regret often emerges after the window for action has closed, which makes it particularly psychologically damaging. Studies in effective neuroscience have shown that regret activates brain regions associated with negative emotional processing, including the medial prefrontal cortex. This means that regret, especially when chronic, can become emotionally paralyzing. One of the challenges in human psychology is temporal discounting, our tendency to prefer immediate rewards over long-term gains. This explains why so many people avoid the pain of discipline. Eating the unhealthy food, skipping the workout, spending impulsively, or procrastinating feels good now, while the consequences seem distant. Unfortunately, over time, these repeated choices accumulate and the cost becomes visible, sometimes irreversibly. This is when the pain of regret sets in. From a clinical behavioral standpoint, helping individuals choose the pain of discipline over the pain of regret often involves enhancing self-awareness and future self-connection. Patients who are guided to visualize their future self and emotionally connect to who they are becoming are more likely to make choices aligned with long-term well-being. They begin to understand that every act of discipline is a deposit into the future, while every indulgence may be a debt that eventually demands repayment. It's also important to recognize that discipline is not punishment. It is a form of self-respect. Choosing discipline means honoring your potential, your goals, and your values. It means living proactively rather than reactively. And while it may be uncomfortable in the moment, it leads to satisfaction, confidence, and freedom, outcomes that can never be found in the aftermath of regret. Interestingly, when individuals consistently practice discipline, the pain diminishes. This is because of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt to repeated behavior. What was once difficult becomes routine. What felt like a sacrifice becomes a new standard. Discipline, when practiced regularly, transitions from pain to power. In therapy, coaching, or personal development work, one of the most transformative realizations a person can have is this: pain is a part of life, but it doesn't have to be meaningless. If you must suffer, let it be the suffering that builds, not the suffering that breaks. Choose the pain that serves you, because the pain of discipline is temporary, but the pain of regret often lasts a lifetime. Behavioral change, from a psychological and neurological standpoint, is rarely the result of one massive shift. Instead, it is the cumulative effect of small intentional choices made consistently over time. This principle lies at the heart of habit formation, cognitive restructuring, and personal transformation. While people often fantasize about big breakthroughs or sudden life overhauls, the truth, supported by clinical science, is that lasting change is built one decision at a time. Small choices create big changes not because they are dramatic, but because they are sustainable, repeatable, and neurologically reinforced through habit loops. In the brain, every action we take, especially when repeated, activates specific neural pathways. The more we engage those pathways, the stronger they become. This is known as Hebbian learning, often summarized as neurons that fire together wire together. When someone chooses to wake up 15 minutes earlier each day, or chooses a glass of water over a soda, or reads a single page of a book before bed, instead of scrolling endlessly on their phone, those actions begin to form new neural connections. Initially, these pathways are weak and require conscious effort, but with repetition they become the brain's default. What once felt like a difficult choice becomes automatic behavior. From a clinical psychology perspective, particularly in the realm of cognitive behavioral therapy (CBT), small behavior shifts are critical. They are known as behavioral activations, tiny actions introduced to disrupt depressive or anxious thought patterns. For example, asking a patient to take a 5-minute walk outside or to make one social phone call in a week might seem trivial, but these micro choices often serve as catalysts for larger cognitive shifts. Over time, they build momentum. The individual begins to experience the psychological benefits of action, mastery, control, agency, which further motivates future action. One of the most important aspects of this process is that small choices feel manageable. The brain, particularly the amygdala, responds to change with caution. Large, sweeping changes can trigger stress responses and emotional resistance, especially in individuals who are already overwhelmed. Small choices, on the other hand, bypass this threat response. They feel safe. They allow the individual to build confidence gradually, which is essential for sustained behavior change. Moreover, small choices don't just affect behavior, they also influence identity. Every decision a person makes is, in a subtle but significant way, a vote for the type of person they are becoming. Choosing to write a journal entry, skip a cigarette, decline a toxic conversation, or take a deep breath before reacting. These may not change a life overnight, but they reinforce a sense of self-efficacy. The more these choices accumulate, the more a person begins to see themselves differently. I am someone who takes care of my health. I am someone who can be disciplined. I am someone who chooses growth. This feedback loop between behavior and identity is deeply embedded in both neurobiology and personal development literature. It also explains why change often feels slow at first, because the results are internal before they are visible. But just like compound interest in finance, the impact of small, repeated actions becomes exponential over time. One healthy choice becomes two, two become four, and before long a new lifestyle is born, not from revolution, but from repetition. There is also emotional significance in making small, intentional choices. Each one provides a moment of self-affirmation, a reminder that you are not at the mercy of old patterns or external circumstances. You are capable of choosing again, moment by moment. That awareness alone can be transformative. In conclusion, when individuals recognize the power of small choices, they no longer wait for dramatic turning points or perfect conditions. They realize they are already on the path to change, as long as they continue to walk at one small, empowered step at a time. And over time, those small choices will not only change habits, but transform the trajectory of an entire life. In the field of psychology and behavioral science, one of the most commonly observed patterns in clients struggling with change is the tendency to wait. They wait for the right time, the perfect moment, or until circumstances feel more comfortable or ideal. This waiting game often leads to paralysis and inaction, a phenomenon known as temporal paralysis, where an individual postpones progress in anticipation of a future event that may never arrive. In truth, the right time is an illusion, a mental construct rooted more in avoidance and fear than in practical readiness. The only time change can occur is now. The human brain is hardwired to seek certainty. It views uncertainty as a potential threat, triggering anxiety and resistance. Therefore, when a person says, "I'll start when I'm ready," or "I'll wait until things calm down," what they're often expressing unconsciously is fear, fear of failure, fear of discomfort, fear of judgment. Yet from a therapeutic standpoint, waiting does not resolve fear, it reinforces it. The longer one postpones action, the more power the fear gains, and the harder it becomes to engage in that behavior later. Avoidance becomes its own self-sustaining loop. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, frequently targets this exact dynamic. One of the primary interventions in CBT is to help individuals engage in behavioral experiments, small, immediate actions designed to test the false belief that I'm not ready. These interventions reveal that readiness is not something you wait for. It is something you create through action. Often individuals discover that they were more capable than they believed. As action replaces hesitation, confidence builds, and the mental script begins to shift from "I can't yet" to "I'm already doing it." From a neuroscientific perspective, action precedes motivation, not the other way around. The popular misconception is that we need to feel motivated before we act. However, research in behavioral psychology shows that the brain generates momentum through behavioral initiation. In other words, starting the task Even if the initial impulse is small, triggers dopamine release, which fuels ongoing effort. This feedback loop explains why people often find that once they begin, they gain energy, clarity, and drive. Waiting for the right emotional state is therefore both inefficient and biologically unfounded. Another critical concept to understand is that life will never offer a perfect moment. There will always be external stressors, internal doubts, competing priorities, or unpredictable setbacks. The belief that there will come a time when everything aligns is a psychological trap. Those who succeed, whether in health, career, relationships, or personal development, do so despite their imperfect circumstances, not because they had ideal ones. The decision to act amidst discomfort, rather than after it, is what distinguishes movement from stagnation. Additionally, procrastination disguised as preparation is one of the most subtle forms of self-sabotage. People often convince themselves that they need more time to plan, research, or think things through. While thoughtful preparation is important, it becomes counterproductive when used as a shield against the vulnerability of beginning. Progress requires exposure. There is no growth without risk. The willingness to take imperfect action is more valuable than waiting for flawless conditions. In clinical practice, helping a client shift from a future-focused mindset to a present-focused one is pivotal. This involves anchoring them in the current moment, helping them recognize the power of small immediate actions, and challenging the cognitive distortions that make the present feel inadequate. When clients begin to act as if they are ready, stepping into the behavior they desire before they feel fully equipped, they often experience significant psychological breakthroughs. Ultimately, the truth is simple but profound. The right time is a myth. The only real time is now. Every moment spent waiting is a moment that could be spent building. You don't need more time, more motivation, or more perfection. You need to begin, because beginning is the first step toward becoming, and in that first step lies the possibility of everything. One of the most empowering realizations in psychology and human development is the understanding that every individual is the architect of their own life. This concept is not abstract or philosophical alone. It is grounded in behavioral science, neuroplasticity, and cognitive theory. The choices a person makes, no matter how small, form the blueprint of their habits, their identity, and ultimately their future. Each decision, when examined clinically, acts as a behavioral cue that influences the neural pathways of the brain, reinforcing patterns that either serve growth or stagnation. In this way, you are not simply a product of your circumstances, you are a product of your responses to them. From a neurobiological standpoint, the brain is malleable. This capacity, known as neuroplasticity, means that your thoughts and behaviors actively reshape the structure and function of your brain over time. Every time you make a decision, whether to exercise or stay sedentary, speak up or remain silent, engage in gratitude or fall into complaint, you are strengthening certain neural connections. These connections become the dominant pathways your brain favors. In other words, repeated choices become mental highways, and those highways form the landscape of your life experience. This is why understanding the power of choice is crucial. Many individuals believe they are reacting to life, that they are being carried along by forces outside their control. While it is true that we do not choose all the circumstances we encounter, such as trauma, loss, or social environment, we do choose how we interpret and respond to those circumstances. In cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, this is a foundational principle that thoughts lead to emotions, which lead to actions, and if you can change the way you think even slightly, you can begin to change the way you live. One of the most therapeutic breakthroughs a person can have is the shift from external blame to internal responsibility. When individuals begin to see that their life is not simply happening to them, but that they are actively shaping it through their choices, their behavior begins to change. They start to act with intention rather than impulse. Instead of asking, "What is life doing to me?" they begin to ask, "What am I building with what I've been given?" This shift is often the catalyst for healing, growth, and long-term change. Behavioral psychology reinforces this idea through the concept of self-efficacy, the belief in one's ability to influence outcomes. Research shows that people with high self-efficacy set goals more effectively, persevere longer, recover faster from setbacks, and experience lower levels of stress and depression. Importantly, self-efficacy is not a fixed trait. It is something that can be developed, one choice at a time. Every small success, every disciplined action, every step in alignment with your values is a brick laid in the structure of your life's architecture. The metaphor of being the architect is also instructive because it implies both vision and responsibility. Architects don't build without blueprints. They plan, adjust, and refine as they go. Similarly, individuals must act with foresight, reflection, and adaptation. It requires asking, what kind of life am I designing, and are my daily decisions aligned with that design? This reflective process is at the heart of both personal growth and therapeutic practice. Ultimately, you become what you repeatedly choose. If you choose discipline, you become disciplined. If you choose learning, you become wiser. If you choose kindness, you become compassionate. Your choices cast votes for the person you are becoming. These votes may not seem significant in isolation, but collectively they determine your identity, your trajectory, and your legacy. So while you cannot always choose what happens to you, you can always choose how you build with it. You are the architect. Your decisions are the tools, and the life you create internally and externally is the result of what you do with both.